Welcome to Azigos, the Truckers Lounge, where we talk raw, real, and unfiltered about the trucking industry. The good, the bad, and the straight up broken. But we don't leave it there. We also empower those ready to reclaim and drive the future of the trucking industry. Today, we're diving deep into how self serving practices are destroying the trucking industry. If you are a shipper or receiver, a broker, or even a carrier doing any of the things we talk about in the episode today, you are contributing towards destroying the trucking industry. But stick around because by the end of this episode, we are not only pointing fingers, but we're handing out roadmaps. So come on in into the lounge. That's Azigos, the Truckers Lounge. How you doing today, Kevin?
Hey, how you doing?
Or should I call you KT?
It doesn't matter. KT.
Okay.
KT is my professional name.
KT is your professional name. Well,
Absolutely.
I'm Tracy and I'm here with KT, and we are your dynamic duo here at Azigos, the Truckers Lounge. And we are super excited to bring this podcast to you. We have a lot to discuss today. And as I mentioned at the top of the introduction, today we are having a deep conversation about how self serving practices are destroying the trucking industry. At one time, the trucking industry was a thriving and booming economy where not only the shippers and brokers were doing well, but the carriers were able to do well. But over the past few decades, the carriers have really taken a hit. And it's unfortunate, wouldn't you say, KT?
Absolutely. When I first started trucking, I came through era. I've been in it for about 20 years. When I first got there, I used to have people in trucking whether they work for a company or whether they was doing their own thing. One thing I noticed they all had in common is that they was able to take care of 2-3 families.
Is that the goal?
At the bare minimum, they was able to have a family in the four corners of the good old US of A. So big truck mean big profits. But now you come up 20 years later, it just seems like all that has went out the door, and you're basically living, check to check to try to make ends meet. And we're trying to get back and make trucking great again.
And make it great for all sectors, right? Because we've seen where the carriers have really taken, when you say sort of like the lion's share of taking, the hit financially in the trucking industry.
Absolutely, absolutely. They're basically, they are a direct target for everything that comes with that possibly could go wrong in trucking. They're taking the brunt of it.
Mm-hmm.
And when everything that can go right in trucking, they're getting the smallest of that portion.
Okay. So we're going to go into what's contributing to that. And a lot of sectors are, contributing towards what we're seeing today. And we're going to start off with the shippers and receivers and how, some of their self serving practices are destroying the trucking industry. One of the things that we hear over and over again is how the shippers and receivers treat time like it's disposable. So let's talk about that. It's particularly the dwell time. Talk about how when shippers and receivers really exploit the trucker's time, how that really contributes and has a negative impact on the industry as a whole.
Well, yeah, of course. Basically, dwell time is the time that it takes for you to get loaded or unloaded at a trucking facility, at a warehouse, at a shipper or receiver. How long it takes as soon as your wheels step foot on their property, for how long it takes for them to load you or unload you. And so what you have right now is people are taking advantage of the driver because of the dwell time, because as you know, time it equals money. Time equals everything, because that's the only thing in life that you can never get back. That's why it's so costly. And so when you have dwell time and you don't actually get paid for dwell time. Now, the rule of thumb, you're supposed to get paid for dwell time after 2 hours. But with the trucking industry being so volatile, you're not even getting paid majority of the time. I would say at least 70% of the time for the time it takes, even beyond the 2 hours. And so now with you having that, but for people just desperate to keep their wheels turning, to make the income, because margins are so skimp right now, you have big companies, big brokers, big shippers, big receivers. They're taking advantage, and the only one who's basically being hurt by the dwell time not being acknowledged is you and I. See, one thing about it, I'm fresh off the road right now. Normally when you have people that's trying to get their opinion on trucking, they don't have any skin in the game. But I'm like you fellas and ladies, I come off the road. I come from the trenches. That's why I'm just trying to share my knowledge, and hopefully we can cause a situation for us all to come together so we can, try to get our power back.
Absolutely. All right. But the shippers and receivers are not the only ones who are contributing to what we see in the trucking industry. Let's talk about the brokers and some of their self serving practices. Uh, they play a role. And one of the things we hear over and over is how brokers try to squeeze every penny without understanding the impact. What is your response to that?
You have a lot broken big brokers or even medium-sized brokers that are multi-millionaires. And so drivers, big drivers, I need you to really look beyond what I just said. Now, a broker, when you find out what does a broker do. A broker basically get hired by shippers or receivers who really don't want to worry about finding available, capable truckers to be able to move their product in a timely manner. And so because they want to spend most of their time on, running their facility and make sure they getting, whatever they need to do, checking in the product, making sure they're working. They don't want to spend time on finding a driver to haul their freight. So they might use a broker. So the broker basically calls you or me to actually do the heavy lifting. So that's it. They sit behind their desk, they sit at a computer or whatever they may have. They might be getting their back rubbed, they might be at the pool, but they are millionaires. They are thousandaires. And the only thing they do is call you or me to do the work.
So it sounds like what you're saying is brokers have minimum risk but high reward.
They have minimum risk, minimum to no risk, and high reward.
Wow, unbelievable. But yet they want to squeeze every penny out of the rates that they have.
Out of the rates, they don't, of course, if you keep your ear to the streets, you have a new law that just been passed that, they have to, if the driver, the carrier, the owner operator asks to see the shipper or receiver actually paying to get their product shipped, that if you ask the broker to reveal what they got, what they're getting paid for that load, that they have to show it. Well, of course, All they doing is going around the back door. If you ask any, especially any major broker or whatever, to see what the shipper or the receiver paid to have this load delivered, then they're gonna blackball you.
Wow. And I'm certain that their lack of transparency, it tends to breed a bit of resentment, wouldn't you say?
Oh, it really breeds a lot of resentment because basically what you having is you have a lot of qualified drivers with CDLs in their pocket, but they have left the industry
Mm.
because
Wow.
they're tired of being taken advantage of,
Right.
which in turn is creating a situation where you have a lot of inexperienced drivers,
Mhm.
a lot of drivers that may or may not even speak the English language
Wow.
that's out there, that's hauling the material,
Mhm.
it just caused a domino effect for safety, you know what I'm saying, quality of life and everything. It affects everything because I know we trying to stay within time restraints, but I had an OG in the trucking game when I first came in,
Mhm.
and he says, you know what keeps America different from just being any other third world country, being a third world country?
What's that?
And I said, no, what? He said, you and I, the trucker, logistics,
Mm.
the ability to, in a reasonable manner, transfer goods and services.
Wow, that's real talk. That's real talk. And I just want to spend one more moment again about these practices of the brokers.
Right.
They're not wanting to pay the detention time. If they're due, they're slow about paying the detention time. And with, them delaying the payments and, you all carriers not really wanting to damage the relationships with the brokers, that really puts a financial strain on you all. And it makes it really tough for you all to stay afloat. Is that
I
correct?
mean, absolutely.
Mhm.
If you notice out here, fellas, drivers, big drivers, if you notice out here, if you making a delivery and you get there such and such time and everything went smooth. But if you notice, the brokers are still asking for your in and out times. What
Mm.
time did you get to the shipper? What time did you get the receiver? And what time did you leave the shipper? What time did you leave the receiver? You might, in your mind, feel like, hey, the delivery went straight. I'm not worried about it. Just turn in your BOL and ready to receive your money. But the reason that they want that is because the broker is still making money off your time
Wow.
and not even wanting to pay you for it.
Wow. And that is crushing the industry because it's causing really the best drivers to end up having
Right.
to leave the industry.
I mean, even if you just like, hey, I just want to keep it moving. I don't feel like fighting for every red cent, every dollar. If you had people doing ethical business and they're still keeping up with your in and out times and they know they're receiving money for that, they should send you back a check.
Mhm.
But do you think they do that?
Mm.
And you know why they don't do that?
Mm.
Because we, the drivers, we're so focused on surviving the day.
Right.
We are not, or we don't have a system that we're keeping up with the time spent. No, I'm not talking about the driving. You getting paid for your actual miles that you're doing, but you are not being paid for your time. And we have let it go without us keeping up with the data and by us all turning in our dwell time, so the powers that be can see that that's no different than free labor. That's no different than slavery. But because we're not charting it and we just letting people who are eating off or who are taking advantage of it chart it, we're not charting it for ourselves. we continue to get buried with this certain system.
Think about that. Is there any other profession out there that's expected to work for free while being blamed for inefficiency? That's something to think about. All right, so we talked about how the shippers and receivers are contributing towards the industry. We've talked about how self serving practices of brokers are contributing towards destroying the trucking industry. But carriers, you are not completely off the hook. There are some things you do that contribute towards destroying the trucking industry. And, it may appear that you're doing it out of survival, and we can understand that, but you're really hurting not only yourself, but your fellow truckers in the business. One of the things that you do that's really helping to destroy the trucking industry is when you repeatedly and continually accept rates and loads below true market value. You want to talk about that a little bit, KT?
Of course, it's all about survival of the fittest. I get it. And you dealing with people or you dealing with brokers and things of that nature. Of course, yeah, it's a business for them too. So of course, they're going to ultimately try to hustle. We just call it what it is. Their game is, how can I get the most money off this load and having to pay the least to the driver. That's their goal.
Mm-hmm.
That's not always been the goal. But since you don't have shady players, it was a rule of thumb back in the day that brokers was like, okay, I'm just trying to get 30%. But because we're in the industry now with so many shady characters, you have brokers that's trying to get 70, 80, 60, 50% off the load because they know that we have an industry full of drivers in business who really don't understand margins,
Mm-hmm.
who, when it comes to finances, they're social illiterate because they're looking at a load. Oh, it's paying $1,500 for me to take it from point A to point B.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just looking at, oh, I do this one run, it's $1,500. But they're not really looking in what all it takes. How much of that $1,500 after you do that load that's actually gonna be able to go in your pocket.
Right.
And so they know there's a lot of drivers in there, a lot of carriers and owner operators who's in the industry that don't understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're taking advantage of it. Instead of just being ethical to make sure that the industry stays strong, we have safe drivers, experienced drivers, and things of that nature. They're not concerned with that.
So it really is a responsibility of the carriers to understand their cost per mile.
It is, what it costs to run their business and make them be able to stay in business.
Okay.
It doesn't matter if you make $200,000, $300,000 a year or whatever it may be, if you only holding on to 60,000,
Right.
70,000, you might as well be a company driver.
Right. So there is a penalty for taking loads that are, really undervalued because you're normalizing cheap freight.
You're normalizing cheap freight.
And every time you haul cheap freight, you are voting for a future where no one makes a profit.
Right.
So it doesn't pay to be self-serving, right? You got to think about the bigger picture. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
But I don't want to just be naive that,
Yeah.
the mentality is I just want to survive and win
Yes.
for the next day.
Yep.
That's why you can actually do both.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you in a current situation where you have to take a specific load at a smaller price,
Mm-hmm.
at least make sure that the data is being collected.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we are failing.
Yes.
We're not sharing the experience and we're not showing exactly, I'm talking about hardcore. We're not showing what's going on in the industry where it it could be pointed out exactly instead of people always speaking in hypotheticals.
And actually, this is a good segue into our next part of this episode is why should they care? I can imagine, carriers, shippers and receivers and brokers watching this, and they may be wondering, well, why should I change up what I do? Why should I even care? Why shouldn't I continue with my self-serving practices? Well, how would you respond to them?
Some situations where if you notice people, and this not even talking to the driver, the truckers or the driver. If you notice when you go to your local supermarket now, if you notice the shelves, the inventory is not as large as it used to be.
Mhm.
That's because it's harder to get, the goods
Mhm.
because, what is it? Oh, 75% of the freight is carried by small shippers. I mean, short. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Oh, no, this is a great point. So
Yeah.
let's talk about why truckers are so important to the American economy. We have some stats for you. According to the American Trucking Association, in 2022, trucks hauled approximately 11.46 billion tons of freight. And some sources report upwards as much as 13.1 billion tons. And that is more than rail, water, and pipeline combined. Now, according to the US Department of Transportation, as of March 2024, over 95% of US trucking carriers operate 10 or fewer trucks. And in fact, fleets with 1 to 6 trucks account for about 86% of all carriers. So basically, what that is saying is not only trucking is essential to the US economy because the majority of our cargo and goods and services at some point is going to end up on a truck. So that's number one. The second point from that statistics is small carriers in particular are essential to the economy. So while a lot of the self-serving practices make it difficult for the small carrier to survive, they are really the bread and butter of the trucking industry. And so if they collapse, if they aren't able to sustain themselves, it puts the trucking industry at risk. And no one is doing anything about it. You think the trucking industry can survive off of the big, large JB Hunts, the big, large Swifts? No. In order for them to survive, you need the mom and pop, small 1 to 2, less than 6 trucks carrier business to operate and move this cargo. That's why they're essential to the US economy. But the self serving practices are forcing them out. And we need to do something about it. And in fact, I believe that the industry is ready for a shift. And the ones who are going to lead this shift are going to be you, carriers. You are going to be at the forefront of driving this shift. What do you have to say about that, Kevin?
Of course, I don't want to, minimize for as we're going to do a stoppage and things of that nature. Nobody make a delivery on Tuesday or whatnot. I don't want to mitigate that. But I'm saying it's other ways to get the attention from the people that matter.
And as a matter of fact, the first step on our roadmap towards making the shift in the trucking community, particularly among the carriers and the small shipper and receivers as well, because we know you're not getting the best out of the industry as well. And we'll talk about that more in future episodes. But our first step is going to be about building community. And we want you to build community with us on this channel. And why is building community so important, KT, before we wrap up?
Yeah, why is it so important? Because we could share our experiences and you might be able to, one thing that's hurt trucking a lot is I call it the death of the CB. The CB, for the trucker was important because At that time when the CB was prevalent, it's almost like we felt like we was in it together. We would constantly check on each other, talk to each other, just from being lonely on the road or whatnot. You might see a driver at 2, 3 in the morning, you might see his truck drifting. You don't even know it. I used to get on the CB, hey, you okay up there, driver? You know, so we don't have nothing centralized for us to be connecting to each other. That's why we all out here individually. And the only way, you know what I mean, we're gonna really make the impact that we're looking for is, of course, it is an individual sport on one aspect, but we shouldn't alienate the part that brings us together as well. We need to be centralized. We need to become a community so we can share our experiences, and we need to tell our story.
All right. So, what would you like for the people to do in the comments? What's their call to action towards building our community?
Yeah, if you can, driver, tell your worst experience for dealing with dwell time. What's the longest time you don't spent at a particular facility,
Wow.
and how was it taken care of?
Interesting. We would love to hear that story. And maybe on a future episode, we will share that with the others out here. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. We look forward to having you back with us every single week. And so, like I said, come on in, join us in the lounge. That's the Z Goes to Truckers Lounge. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast. Until next time, we'll see you.
Yeah, remember, big truck, big profit.
Yeah.
And yeah, I want to say one more thing.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, bear with me, trucker. Like I tell you, I'm not from the studio. I'm from where you at. I'm fresh off the road right now. So don't use the lack of smoothness of the delivery not to understand that I'm in it with you. Because, you know, I'm not in the most difficult situation right now, but you matter to me. I feel connected to you. I've been in this industry for 20 years. So yeah, big truck versus everybody.
You
Look
heard
forward to hearing from you.
Hey, you heard it here. Until next time. Thank you.
Thank you.